talked about in the song, when Dave does the whole rap, hey man, look at you. You're going to get some leg tonight for sure. You know, that kind of thing. What happened was Ted had come into the studio that day wearing a sharp white suit. It was interesting that Dave started just sort of like, bantering back and forth, and Ted wanted to capture that on the record. And the one who said, come on, Dave, give me a break, that's actually Ted saying that, which is kind of funny. But it starts getting into some of the little background politics. Like, for example, during Fair Warning, Ed had married Valerie, and she was a TV sweetheart on One Day at a Time, and that this agitated Dave, and Dave refused to be an usher at Ed's wedding, and he didn't even show up to the party at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and that was kind of interesting. Dave, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's one of those quirky Dave things where he does what he wants, and as much as he knows how to be a ringleader in a crowd full of thousands of people, like he doesn't show up at a social event, at the after wedding party, which Ted said was basically a power play,
right?
Which I can totally see Dave doing. It was nice to hear Ted confirm how the talking part in Unchained was done.
Yep.
And that he was coming in was it a white suit? I thought he just said he was coming in wearing a suit.
It was a white suit. Yeah, white suit.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. But I just thought, that wasn't spontaneous. It was definitely rehearsed.
No. It was inspired by Dave's comments. Like, for example.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is lots of great background information on these albums. I mean, they happen pretty quick. I mean, they were happening every year, going all the way back to Van Halen 1. On Van Halen 2, I was surprised how much time he spent on You're No Good compared
oh, my God, he went
to
on
the
and
rest
on.
of the album. Because I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm not in love with that song.
Right.
I mean, Ted thinks it's the best version of the song ever.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, I got to tell you, I know this is sacrilegious, but I think Linda Ronstadt's version is much better. And Linda's is a cover, is not the first version of the song either.
Yeah.
I was just like amazed. He spent quite a few pages on that.
Yeah.
And the rest of the album, was boiled down to like a couple of paragraphs.
Yeah, that was a little weird. You know what I think he loves about that song, Dave? I think he loves the sonic capturings on there. Like, he got some crazy yelps from Roth, and also a great performance from Ed. So I think the way that came together, I think, wowed him somehow. But I tell you, it's very interesting, and it's telling for the rest of the book. The certain things that really impress Ted, and the things that don't. It's actually very surprising. That's sort of a theme that goes throughout the book, especially in the Van Halen parts at least, is that you're like, wow, he was really wowed with that. But this he wasn't impressed by. It's a little interesting how he gets so wrapped up in certain things and other things he blows past. Okay, so the next thing, we get to Diver Down. Okay, so this is where the beginning of the breakdown starts. If you could just, Diver Down I call the cracks. You could just, all of a sudden, you start seeing the cracks. So this is where I got very confused. And this is where it started to remind me a little bit of the Ace Frehley book, Ace Frehley's No Regrets biography, where I think memory gets a little clouded or confused. I mean, this is just my impression. I mean, this is Ted's perspective, okay? But some of this doesn't add up, and this is what I don't understand. So he talked about in the book saying like it was like Ed's idea to do Pretty Woman as a standalone single or something like that, and they were all into doing this video for MTV. And I don't quite understand, like, why Warner Brothers would be all into putting out a single and a video with no album to back it. Then the single gets released, and it's a hit, so they run into the studio to rush out an album, which is Diver Down. And the time frame doesn't make any sense, because the single gets released in February of 1982. And then they start saying it starts to do well, and they're kind of rushing the album to catch on the heat of the single, and the album comes out in April of 82. So it doesn't make any sense to me. They had no plans for an album and they rushed that through. He says, I never wanted them to do that song, referring to Pretty Woman. I didn't even like it when Roy Orbison did it. He said it's vocally wrong for Dave, and he was vehemently against this. But what I didn't understand was, why he was so supportive of it. It didn't make none of that made sense. What did you think of that whole thing?
Yeah, it was weird. I think what they wanted to do at that time was, after basically doing 4 albums in a row,
right,
they wanted to take some time off.
Right.
But they didn't want to not have a presence
right
on the charts. They didn't want to go away completely. So they said, all right, look, we'll do a single, we'll put it out there,
right,
and then we'll take some time.
Right.
Because, the cracks were showing in Diver Down, but even before that, the cracks were also showing around the Fair Warning era.
Right.
Which, also Noel Monk talks in his book.
Right.
These guys, they never took a break.
Right.
So
right.
they wanted to take a break. They had great intentions of taking a break.
Yeah.
The only problem was,
right.
is that the single at the time was rising up the charts to be their highest charting single at the time.
Right.
So, of course, the record company is going to be like, Ted actually says, the money's in the album.
Right.
Not in the single, at least at that time.
At that time, for sure, yeah.
They didn't make any money on singles. They made money on albums.
Right.
So here's this single rising up the chart. There's no album behind it. So that reminded Ted of his early days when he was in Harper's Bazaar.
Right.
And they had a single, Feeling Groovy. It started going up the charts. And then they had to do an album to support it, which of course threw the band completely off because they thought they were going to take time off. And yeah, you're right. The timing does seem wacky because it's like, how fast did they make that album? Did they hang it out in a month?
Yes.
And then you're telling me the record company had another month to put it out, do the artwork, do the promotion, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
And then boom, it was out. Talk about a rush release. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think that was also why there were cracks, because Van Halen thought they were getting some time off.
Right.
They didn't. They had to rush release an album, do covers,
right,
which, as we all know, Ed wasn't enamored with.
Right.
There are some great originals on that album. And then they had to go and tour again when they didn't think they were going to tour right away.
Right.
Meanwhile, Ed had just gotten married.
Right.
And all that jazz. And I guess they really weren't in a position to go back to the record company and say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not putting on an album. We're taking the time off that we said we were going to take off. I guess even though they had 4 albums in front of them that went platinum, they didn't have that kind of pull. And unfortunately for the band, that album sold Diver Down. Sold really well.
Yeah.
Certainly did a lot better than Fair Warning. Fair Warning had been their worst-selling album to date.
Right.
And here comes Diver Down, and I don't know if it was their best-selling album to date.
No, it wasn't. But it was good. It was Look, they had.
It was really good.
They all of a sudden had heat, and they had heat on a single. Now you got MTV coming out. They're playing the video. It was like a wave that they had to get on the surfboard and ride it. They had no choice. You got the hit, great. Make an album, get back on tour, get going. Because
I don't think MTV was playing the video though. Didn't it get banned by MTV?
I don't know. Didn't they edit it or something?
Yeah, but that was the whole other thing. Ted said, I didn't understand why they were spending so much time on the video.
Right.
Because he was all about the music, and then they had to do the Intruder intro because the video was too long.
Right.
And he just did not understand. They were basically making the music for the video.
Right.
And why they were just so focused on that when they should have just been focused on the music.
Right. Now, here's the other thing this is where it became a very big breakdown. Okay. So they decided to do Dancing in the Street, the single cover, and then Ed had this original piece of music that Ted wanted to use to attach to it. So now, if you remember, you listen to the Van Halen version of Dancing in the Street, which, by the way, was recently covered by the Struts. The whole intro is basically like an original piece of music that Ed attached to the song Dancing in the Street. And by the time you get to the chorus and the different verses, they're all dancing in the street. It's almost like two songs in one put together. They almost took like a Van Halen song and mixed it with Dancing in the Street and came out with this song. But meanwhile, Ed got no credit for it, and it's really bothered Ed. And he says, I love Ed, but his complaints about the song are hard to stomach. Ed at the time never told me he wasn't happy with what was done with the song, and it's clear that this incident was a big reason why he'd seek more creative control going forward. Now that was interesting. He starts getting into the building of 5150. This is where the book gets really wild. He says, I was never against him building it, meaning 5150, the studio. I was never against him building it. Still, I saw it as a home studio because when it was first being built, we never talked about recording the next Van Halen album in 5150. I thought that was the strangest comment ever. Why the hell do you think Ed was building a studio if he wasn't planning to record the next Van Halen album there? That made no sense to me. How is it that when I was 12 years old reading this in the magazine, I knew that he was going to record the next Van Halen album there, but he didn't know that. What did you think of that?
I didn't think it was as strange as you did.
Really?
No, I mean, he wanted a studio, so he could practice in there, do demos in there, things like that. The fact that Ted thought, okay, he's going to build a home studio, this way, he can practice on his own, that's fine. I mean, the fact it never crossed his mind that they would record Van Halen albums there, that's not surprising because that's what you go to professional studios for.
Right.
Well, I guess what Ted didn't realize at the time was it was really a power play by Ed.
Oh, yeah.
Because he really wanted to make albums his way, and this was his way of doing that.
Right.
But the thing is, Ted's always had a different perspective and has not always understood members of the band's perspective, even going back to when they signed the deal for the first Van Halen album.
Yeah.
Ted talks about, these guys, they said how, they didn't get a good deal right away, but they forget when they were hungry and didn't have a record deal.
Right. They would have signed anything.
Would have signed anything, and they did sign anything. And then they complain later how they got a bad deal.
Right.
And Ted's like, I don't understand that. And the thing is, Van Halen has said some of the live interviews they've done, Ted is Ted.
Yeah.
And that's that. Even Sammy had said in his autobiography, those guys had gotten not a great deal. And that's putting it nicely.
Right.
When they first signed with Warner Brothers.
Right.
And I think the band realized that. So sure, they got a record deal, but they felt like they weren't getting paid what they thought they should have been getting paid.
Right.
And so Ted, the executive, as opposed to Ted, the record producer,
right,
that part of him starts coming out in those parts of the book,
yeah,
where it's talking about when they sign their record deal,
right,
or later on when they're doing Diver Down. I mean, not so much Ted the record. Well, yeah, maybe Ted the record executive. He just didn't see the fact that Ed was so frustrated that he was definitely going to be recording the next Van Halen album, even though the studio was still being built.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They were, they were still putting stuff together.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It was literally a mess when they walked into it. But Ed did not care.
No.
Because he wanted to make
the
album his way.
Yep.
I mean, that was his way of controlling Ted, not, when Ted shows up at the door,
right,
and, Don Landy is not answering and driving away.
Yeah, we get into that. This is interesting.
Yeah, all sorts of BS like that.
Yeah. So what he said was he wasn't happy about 5150. He called it a semi-completion state with everything that was jerry-rigged. He says, whenever I was in there, I felt like I was working in a bathtub. Everything was so confined. It really felt off to me. Now, here's the other part. Don Landy was Ted's right-hand man. They were like Batman and Robin, those two. Those guys were like a duo team that really made some incredible producing albums, beyond Van Halen too. But he said, Ed always wanted me to be happy with it, meaning 5150, and Don wanted it to work for all of us too. They were all pushing for 5150. And he said, I was willing to give it a try, even though I had reservations. But he wanted the band to record at Sunset Sound, where he knew how to do everything and everything was cool. But this was a total power play move. And as we get deeper into this, especially into the 1984 album, boy, does this become a power play movie. We get to 5150. They're working on the 1984 album, and Ed was all jazzed about the keyboard riff for Jump. We all know the famous keyboard